Everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar with CPRA and the Rick Hansen Foundation on Accessibility Certification Program. My name is Vishna Zaborski-Breton, and I am the Director of Communications with the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association. And we're pleased that you are spending your lunch hour with us, or in the case of our friends out west, your morning coffee. Thank you for your patience as we had to reschedule this presentation from last week. So we're very happy that you're able to join us at this new time. We hope that you leave today's webinar with a better sense of the Accessibility Certification Program and how it will benefit you in the Parks and Recreation sector. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association, or CPRA, is the national organization dedicated to realizing the full potential of parks and recreation as a major contributor to community health and vibrancy. CPRA is the national voice for parks and recreation in Canada. Our members are the 13 provincial and territorial parks and recreation associations and their extensive networks of service providers in over 90% of Canadian communities. CPRA hosts webinars throughout the year which provide tools, resources, and best practices for parks and recreation practitioners in Canada. We have held webinars on subjects like Parks for All initiative, CPRA Professional Development Certification Program, the Framework for Recreation in Canada, and many others. For a full listing of our past webinars and to learn about upcoming presentations, I invite you to visit our website, www.cpra.ca, and follow CPRA on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Just before we get going today, I wanted to share some housekeeping items with you. As we have mentioned previously, today's webinar will be recorded and will be posted to the CPRA website for future reference. We will send a note to everyone who had originally registered for the session, and we will also be sharing the recording link on our website and our social media platforms. During today's presentation, you'll have an opportunity to participate in the discussion through polling, which will pop up on your screen, as well as the chat pod, as Jennifer has already mentioned, and some of you have posted messages in already. As Jennifer mentioned, there's 2 documents for you to download and to take away with you afterwards. And we'll also have an opportunity for a question and answer session that will take place following the presentation. So I'd like to thank Parks and Recreation Ontario for providing us with the technical support for today's webinar, and I'd like to thank Jennifer for all of her help, and she will be here with us providing technical assistance as she has already. I'd like to welcome and introduce our presenter today. We have Brad McCannell, who is the Vice President of Access and Inclusion with the Rick Hansen Foundation. Brad's expertise in the area of disability comes from both personal experience and practical knowledge. As a leader in the field of accessibility for the past 24 years, Brad has extensive experience in the application of universal design across the built environment. He works closely with the Canadian national and provincial building codes and is well versed with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Welcome, Brad. And with this, I'd like to now turn things over to our speaker.
Well, thank you very much. This is a terrific opportunity. They say never to start with an apology, but I owe you all one. We had to reschedule the webinar because traffic in Vancouver is notoriously bad, but when one of the bridges gets completely taken out, it turns into some kind of nightmare. And just by way of reference, I left my house at 7 a.m., which should have put me in the office at about 7:45, well advanced of the presentation. And after the bridge went out and the traffic got into gridlock, I actually didn't get to the office till 11:15. So gives you a sense of how long I was sitting in traffic. I thought to myself, maybe I could do the presentation from the car, but we decided that was probably not a great idea. But anyway, I apologize for that, and let's just move on. I'm here to discuss and announce the launch of the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification Program. and how it might affect park operators. But before I get into the details of that, I thought I'd give you some background on just exactly what it was. It seems kind of unnecessary in a sense because most everybody knows who Rick Hansen is and what the foundation has done, but at the risk of telling you stuff you already know, I'll just walk you through some of the high points of what's been happening and how we got to the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification Program. So as most of you are well aware, when Rick completed his journey, that was 30 years ago, and that's hard to believe. It was an epic journey of 40,000 kilometers, literally around the world, traveled through 34 countries over 26 months, and challenging assumptions about what people thought people with disabilities were capable of. I was there on the night that he left. And in those days, I was in the television business. I was a television producer, and I had my own production company. And I read in the paper that this guy named Rick Hansen was going to literally reel around the world. And I turned to my producers, and I said, you know, we got to get this guy on tape because he probably is never coming back. So we went there with the crew, and we went to his apartment the night before he left. And it was quite interesting because it was 5 or 6 people madly working on wheelchairs and screwing bolts in and pumping up tires. And I sat with Rick and I did what would turn out to be his first television interview. And after about 40 minutes of discussion and going through things, I asked him, you know, any last thoughts before you go? And he turned to me and he said, yeah, you know, what if I do this? What if I roll around the world? And what if I spend the next 2 years of my life dedicated to this and I come back and nothing has changed? That was his big fear. Well, I'm here to tell you, Rick, a few things have changed. Oops, I hit the wrong button there, I think. The Rick Hansen Foundation has a legacy of identifying gaps and resolving barriers to people with disabilities and resolving them on a national scale. The Rick Hansen School Program has brought awareness to thousands of students literally across the country in 2,500 schools, and that program runs as part of curriculum every day. The RHF Barrier Buster programs helps community address access issues at a grassroots level, instead of just talking about change, actually making meaningful change. The Rick Hansen Institute for Spinal Cord Research is a good example of how the foundation recognized how centralized information and critical research center could accelerate the progress of cure and research goals that literally crossed borders and changed lives. So for 30 years, the Rick Hansen Foundation has been very busy. In that time, we raised over $330 million, all of which was turned back into projects to meet our mission. Our mission is, and no small mission, this one, to create a barrier-free world for people with disabilities. Our focus now has shifted from awareness building and research and cure, although we still support those completely. Our focus now as the foundation is on the built environment. The built environment is the key in our major accessibility in our view. While there's many pillars that need to be overcome to accommodate all people with disabilities, transportation, communications being the other 2 big ones that come to mind. But for our purposes, the built environment became our focus because we view the built environment as the key to full citizenship, the key to full participation. If I can't, as a wheelchair user, as a person with vision loss, as a person with a hearing impairment, as a person with an intellectual disability, if I can't participate, if I can't go to any store, if I can't jump on a bus, if I can't ride the streets and jump off and have a coffee, then I'm not a full citizen. I do not have access to the same things everybody else does. And we believe that it's a relatively easy fix, although a long-term one, to create a built environment that creates what we call meaningful access. So in terms of the numbers, many of you know all these numbers, but right now 1 in 7 Canadians currently identify as having a disability affecting their mobility, vision, or hearing. And that number is projected to increase to 1 in 5 in roughly 20 years. 1 in 5, 20% of the population. But that stat hides another number, and it's something we often forget because we focus on that idea that 20% or 30% or whatever the current number is are people with disabilities. But the thing to remember is everyone who has a disability has at least one other person in their life, even if it's a paid caregiver. So the reality is that stat doubles at least. It means that upwards of 40% of the population will be directly affected by access in the built environment for people with disabilities. So it's a major issue in terms of creating meaningful access. The attack has to be on the built environment. And it has to be about inclusion. It has to be about moving forward. I've got a question for you. There, the poll question I wanted to ask you is, do you know a person with a significant disability? Someone in your inner circle? Someone you're acquainted with? I'd like to see the answer on that, because one of the things that we're finding is we have an increasingly active community of people with disabilities. And so what's that mean in terms of the built environment? How does that affect operators? And what does that mean at the end of the day? And so I'm looking at the results coming in here, and I'm pushing the wrong button. I can't see it. There it is. And wow, that's quite high, actually. I'm seeing 64, 56. It's about an even split between people with people who have someone in their inner circle and someone that they're acquainted with. So that's disproportionately high, and it's really good news. Because to me, the key to creating meaningful access is literally putting a face on disability. So as you think about that, as you think about whether you know a person with a disability or not, or how closely you've interacted with them, I'm going to ask you another question. This time you don't have to answer the poll because I think we know the answer, but the question I always ask is, how many of you now have or have ever had a mom? The thing you have to recognize is that it's our moms that are driving the statistics right now. It's the silver tsunami, the older adults and seniors, the demographic that is just overwhelming facility operators. You know, we used to look at disability in terms of wheelchair users, people with mobility impairments, people who are deaf, people with hard of hearing, people who are blind or partially sighted, people with intellectual or cognitive disabilities. But now that group is all one person. It's all one person, and it's your mom. The silver tsunami, along with a significant increase in the number of people with disabilities active in the community. So as operators, we have to be fully aware that the older adults and seniors in our population are, in fact, people with disabilities. Statistically, age 55 to 64 are considered older adults. And it's the statistical onset of being less able. Can't walk as far, can't see as well, can't bend over as much, can't hear as good, can't run as fast, but not disabled. And there's an interesting thing about the older adults and seniors. Older adults and seniors don't have disabilities, and they'll hit you with their canes if you say they do. My mom is a classic example. My mom is 89 years old. She uses a walker. Can't go more than 50 feet without sitting down. Her hearing's terrible. Her vision is not much better. But she feels sorry for me because I have a disability. Let that sink in for a second. She says, well, it's not like I use a wheelchair. Well, the truth is, if she used a wheelchair, she'd be way better off. She could move faster. She could move more stable. She wouldn't need to sit down every 15 minutes. We tried to put grab bars in my mother's shower. I actually bought them and brought them over. I tried to put them in, and she said, no, 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 no. I said, why not, Mom? And she says, well, what if somebody sees them? They'll think I'm disabled. Well, that begs two questions. Number one, Mom, who are you showering with? And number two, really? You'd put your personal safety at jeopardy over the look of something? And the answer is yes, a resounding yes. Older adults and seniors do not like the label of disabled. Labeled disabled is a significant problem in the whole community, but amongst older adults and seniors, it's absolutely epidemic. My mother won't use what she calls the handicapped cabs. She loves the idea. She thinks it's great for me, but she won't get in it because of that little wheelchair guy, that little stick man that you see. She doesn't want to use disabled language around herself. She regards herself as normal. And this is part of the changing face of disability. The sheer numbers of this new demographic, combined with their unwillingness to be segregated or treated differently, is forcing facility operators to rethink just who their clients are and how to address their real needs over the long term. So it comes back to a concept we call meaningful access. Not code access, real access, access that actually affects people. So what is meaningful access? It's based on real inclusion. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution the way codes try to approach things. It addresses the real needs of the community. It's code-based without being code-centric. It considers location, occupancy, site conditions, and the basic community, the surrounding community, all as contributing factors to the accessibility of any given facilities. But most importantly, it recognizes that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Access is a very interesting thing. If you have an incredibly accessible washroom at the top of a set of stairs, it doesn't help me. And this was the problem in the past. What was happening in the past was people would go to a facility or a site or a building with a checklist, and they'd walk in and they'd look at the bathroom and, wow, it was a great bathroom. It passed all the check marks. And they walk down the hall and say, oh, wow, that's a great elevator. Passed all the check marks. So people came away thinking that was an accessible building. But the reality is, nobody looked at reception. Nobody looked at the front door or the parking or the transit stop or the drop-off zone. Nobody looked at the stairs or the fire provisions, exiting provisions. We felt it important to develop a plan and design a built environment for the broadest range of users, and therefore that meant that the important thing here was that the entire experience had to be evaluated to measure meaningful access. It's not enough to have an accessible washroom. It just doesn't work that way. So in order to cope with that concept and get away from the checklist approach, get away from people following code minimum as their guide, and don't get me wrong, code's a good place to start, but it falls way short of the real meaningful access, and particularly for this group of park operators where codes often don't apply, or if they do apply, they're applied unevenly. So what we did, we looked at the problem, we decided what we needed is an overall rating system a rating system that judged the overall site and could put it on a scale. The RHFAC, the Rick Hansen Accessibility Certification Program, evaluates the accessibility of commercial, institutional, multifamily residences, buildings, sites, and parks. And to some extent, trails. We're developing a trail module, which we'll talk about in a little while. The RHFAC, you know, it doesn't really roll off the tongue as nicely as we'd like. I wanted to call it BRAD, actually, the Buildings Rated for Accessible Design, but at the end of the day, we figured if anybody's name's going to be on, it's probably going to be Rick's. At its simplest, the RHFAC is a national scale for accessibility. It cuts through the fragmented and myriad of codes, requirements, and measures the actual level of accessibility provided to the users, their overall experience regardless of what code the facility was built to. So it's important to recognize this is not another standard, not another new standard to follow. It's RHFAC measures code, it does not measure code compliance. It does not rely on code. It's not measuring code. We are not the code police. We measure accessibility, and we celebrate it wherever we can find it. One of the problems we've had in the past with these kinds of programs is that they focus on what's wrong. They focus on code problems, code omissions, and they become a bad news story because of that. Our goal is to find good access and celebrate it. Our goal is to create a program that identifies good access practice and finds ways to promote it and celebrate it and create an aspirational goal. Some of the benefits are outlined in this slide. One of the great benefits is that the owners or operators become aware of their accessibility and allow them to take actionable improvements. For us, there's really three main outcomes of the RHFAC in the early stages here. Number one, it creates an inventory of the access issues that are out there right now. Right now, the problem we have as a community is we only know what's not accessible. We only know what properties have been complained about, you know, maybe a human rights complaint or just a complaint to the operator. We don't have an inventory of what's actually out there. So the RHFAC does that. It creates an inventory of what's out there and a roadmap out to show people how to create access over the long term. The second thing it does is it creates an aspirational goal for the industry. And this is critically important to us. And in this way, we kind of mimic the LEAD program, or maybe BOMA Best. By creating a national scale, what we're actually doing is providing a way through all the, right now there's nothing but codes and regulations. They're all, everywhere you go, it's different. All the architects and planners look at these issues and struggle with it, because if you're meeting national building code, then you're not doing enough for real access. The idea that meeting code is meeting a standard is false. Code is not a standard. Code is a minimum requirement. If your access strategy is based on code, then you're putting your hand up and you're saying, I'm going to do the very least I can possibly do. So that doesn't function very well in the real world. Parks and recreation facilities are often unique because the code may or may not apply depending on all kinds of situations. Most codes don't extend access considerations into the outdoor environment. But that's really okay, because the outdoor environment is quite different than the indoor. This is one of the problems we've had in the past where well-meaning advocates or people who haven't had enough experience in the field, when they pull out regulations or requirements for parks, or maybe they establish an access standard for parks, what they often do is they just cut and paste pieces of the building code and dump it into a parks document. And there's some value in that, but just transferring building code information into an parks access requirement isn't very effective. You know, for example, like a 1 in 12 ramp in an interior of a building, it suits a lot of users, although I would argue it's still not accessible. But if you just take that information and try to apply it outside on uneven ground or gravel, where there's gravel and debris and all kinds of barriers, that approach would eliminate all but the most very capable wheelchair users, for example. So the standards used in parks and outdoor recreational facilities have to reflect that reality. Wayfinding takes on a new importance in parks and trails. Wayfinding in a building is important, but if they do something wrong, they're not going to end up miles from their home. In parks, users are no longer confined to the building, so misdirection can actually become hazardous. And there's lots of things we can do in a park setting. Lots of things we can do that are cheap and efficient ways of helping with wayfinding. It could be something as simple as color on posts. We had one client who built a trail expressly designed for older adults and seniors, and targeting, in fact, people with Alzheimer's and people with dementia, in the hopes that the outdoor experience would help them. And they attended this park that one day, and people liked the idea of being there, and they had a good time, but never came back after that first trip. We were asked to investigate and see what happened. Why were the people not using the park? And upon further investigation, what we discovered was people would go out onto these lovely little trails that were well-treed and very private. And as they walked along, people with cognitive issues, people with intellectual disabilities, people with dementia problems, started to get anxious. They realized they didn't know their way back. And instead of being a lovely day in the park, it became an anxiety-ridden experience. To help them, all we did was we pounded posts in along the pathway. And if you were walking away from the parking lot, you saw a red splash of paint on the back of the post. If you turned around and walked back the other way, what you saw is a blue splash of paint. So as long as you kept walking toward the blue, you were walking back toward your car or the washrooms or your loved ones or whatever you're walking back to. Very simple solution, very effective, very inexpensive. You can do the same with scented gardens along the route. This helps people with vision loss, helps people with cognitive impairments identify where they are. You can use water features, like a babbling brook or a fountain or whatever you might have. It makes a distinct sound and therefore orients people. You can use the surfaces that people are walking on. It's literally wayfinding to help them in and out, to relieve anxiety, to provide people with vision loss accurate wayfinding. These are all things you won't find in the building code. These are all things that are critical to park operators and people working outside. So relying on the building code is not going to get you where you want to go. We had another issue with an operation that had an outdoor pit toilet and had a lovely little house around it. It was quite comfortable to be in. It met all the requirements. But typical of these types of installations, over the years, maybe over the months, erosion started to eat away at the door sill, the threshold at the door. And the result was about a 1-inch, 2-inch lip where the gravel had washed away right at the threshold. And I'm here to tell you that there's few things that will ruin your day quicker than a 1-inch threshold between you and the bathroom you need to get to in a hurry. So gravel approaches to the front of a typical outhouse or pit toilet, those gravel approaches need to be cribbed to minimize erosion, to virtually eliminate that lip at the front door. So these are the kinds of things that parks operators have to kind of look at beyond what building code will do for you. Playgrounds are an issue all to themselves. They need to be inclusive places, of course, not just for children, but also for adults with disabilities. And this is an important part of planning that often gets overlooked. Playgrounds, though, are in and of themselves a major challenge. And there's a number of different philosophies on how play spaces need to work. I would caution you not to just follow the manufacturer's recommendations here, but rather look deeply into who's actually using the park and understanding their real needs. So facility planning that accommodates all users. The challenge of the users at their own development level on an age-appropriate play equipment is an important part of the playground things. So looking at playgrounds, that could be a seminar all by itself. The important thing to understand is we're trying to support community. We're trying to support intergenerational living. As the population expands so rapidly, one of the great opportunities for community is intergenerational living, letting mom, be able to live in your house because the house is accessible, letting mom be able to come on excursions into the park because it's accessible. So these are all important parts of this little equation. One of the other RHFAC benefits is to increase a pool of reliable trained professionals in accessibility. And I'll go over that in detail in a minute. But one of the problems the industry is having is we're getting reliable advice. It's very difficult because there's so many codes, because the information is so fragmented. And often what happens is an architect or a planner or an operator will turn to a person with a disability or maybe a local advocate. And the problem then is now they're getting personal preference in terms of recommendations. You're getting what that person may or may not have experience with beyond their own disability. So we need professionals in the field. Another example of how RHFAC can benefit is accessible venues cost less to operate over the long term. And I don't have a really good park example, to be honest, but I do have a really good commercial space example, and that's Vancouver International Airport. If I go to Vancouver International Airport and I have to be pushed to the gate because I can't make it on my own, or led sighted guide to the gate for personal vision loss, or otherwise have to support the community of people with disabilities. If I just push them to the gate and park there, two things happen. Number one, I got to pay someone to push that person to the gate. So that's an HR cost, and that's going to accelerate over the years. Bricks and mortar depreciate, people appreciate. But the second thing that happens is they push me to the airport and park me in a hold room. I'm not stopping to buy the $17 tuna sandwich, or I'm not going into the stores and who knew that there was a PGA store in the airport? Who knew there was a tailor there? Who knew there was a dentist there? So by pushing me and locking me down in the hold rooms, I'm not spending money. I'm not interacting with this building. I'm not creating the economic flow that's required to drive these big buildings. So by becoming accessible, YVR has been voted the most accessible airport in North America, 4th year in a row, 8 years as #1 airport in North America. And a big part of that is how we handle the community of people with disabilities. Another benefit of the RHFAC is developers can get through the municipal planning process quicker, just by virtue of the fact that there's less to review once an RHFA sticker goes on a building. And there should be fewer retrofits of existing facilities moving forward. So for us, in terms of delivering the program, there's 3 key components to the RHFA system. The first one is rating and certification. We base our ratings on 8 categories. So when when an inspector arrives on site, he's looking at 8 different categories to judge the building on. Remember, the object of the exercise is to put the building on a national scale for accessibility. So the trained assessor will look at that and divide it into these 8 modules that start with vehicular access, which includes transit, drop-off zones, cabs, parking. Then goes on to approaches into building, the entrance, interior circulation, interior services, emergency services, wayfinding, and something called additional use of space. So that would be where there's something unique in the building. Maybe it has a pool, maybe it has a daycare center, maybe it has a fitness room. But the object of the exercise for the assessor is to go in using these 8 categories, rate the building's facility on a scale, and that gets averaged back onto a scorecard for the entire building. The importance of that is, now as an operator, you have a snapshot of what your building looks like, what your facility looks like, what your park looks like in terms of overall access. Part of the scorecard, part of the report that comes along with the scorecard are 2 sections from the assessor. Section 1 is, we call it the low-hanging fruit. It's a series of bullet points that you can do that will create much better access, more meaningful access, by doing the simple things. And it could be anything from a power door, or it could be putting an induction loop over the reception desk to benefit people who are hard of hearing. It could be wayfinding. It could be a better washroom in the park. Once that's done, once you've been rated by a professional, you now, as the owner, have an option. The scorecard reveals your level of access. It reveals on 8 different categories where things could be improved or where things don't need to be improved. At that point, the owner has the option of publishing to a registry operated by the Canadian Standards Association, so becoming CSA certified, as a CSA accessibility certified, RHF accessibility certified. Boy, that comes off your tongue real easy, doesn't it? We have 2 levels. One is accessibility certified, our base level, and we have accessibility certified gold, which looks at facilities that have gone above and beyond code. Remember, part of our mission here is to find the good things and celebrate the good things, to look at access in a positive light, not a negative one. So where there's good things, we want to identify it, we want to celebrate it. So the owner at that stage has to make a decision whether they go public with the information, in which case they would be on the RHFAC, on the CSA website, registry site, where people would go and see the rating. It would become public. And at that point, the owner has the option of labeling their facility as RHF accessibility certified or accessibility certified gold. The important thing to remember there is that the owner-operator remains in control of the rating at all times. So if for some reason they didn't want it published, it wouldn't be published. We respect the information as being personal and private for the operator. The next big step in the process for us, for anyone really, is the professional training side of this. In order to make an assessment of a building based on 8 categories, we require a person to have passed our Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certified Training Program. We just did the initial one. It's a 60-hour course over 2 weeks, live in the classroom, and it's designed to take people with no background in building, no background in universal design, and bring them up to speed so that they can conduct an RHFAC rating. Now, we can't begin to teach them everything they need to know about universal design in 60 hours. God, I've been doing this for 25 years, and every week I still learn something new. Our goal is to create a solid platform in the seven principles of universal design, give people hundreds of applications of it, practical applications in the real world. The training takes people through the 7 principles of universal design. It takes them through how to read a building code, how to read a floor plan, how to read a schematic, how to read construction drawings. It walks people through the entire building process and helps them find their place in it as an access assessor. And then once the students have passed the course, and it's a pass or fail course, they have to do an assessment at the end. It's their assignment, and if they fail the assignment, they fail the course. But so far, nobody's failed. But once they've done that, then they have the opportunity to write an exam administered by the Canadian Standards Association that will result in a certificate that these are RHFAC access professionals capable of delivering a RHFAC rating on any given property. This creates a pool of experts that the industry can draw on. Right now, honestly, at the risk of sounding like a complete egomaniac, in the whole of Canada, there are somewhere between 5 and 10 people with the kind of knowledge that I have in terms of the depth of access, the impact of access and how it works, and the subtleties of access and how you apply it. We need more professionals. So the idea of this course is it turns out a regular class, and what's going to happen now is it's the classes and the education is being rolled out as part of conventional professional development. Again, not unlike LEADS, with the LEAD professional program. It's our hope that we will have people take the course, and with this new understanding of universal design, and with this ability to literally see the built environment differently than they ever had before, be a resource to the planning community, be a resource to the architects, and be a resource to the park operators who have been kind of left in the lurch here with no reliable code to turn to and a changing demographic that's affecting the whole operations. Just trying to find a slide here. The third part of our program at Rick Hansen Foundation includes accessibility services. These are our experts available to go deeper into the issue that you might have on site or to resolve access issues at a deeper level. Remember that the RHFAC is a snapshot in time. It's not a detailed assessment of every facility. It's the trained professional walking in onto a site and making a judgment call on that day, at that time, this was the access level that they found. And the scorecard and the recommendations from the assessor will lead the operator on areas that need attention from the perspective of access for people with disabilities. The report they receive as part of the RHFAC is not prescriptive. It doesn't provide detailed solutions. So, for example, if you need a grab bar in the bathroom, the report would call for you to upgrade the bathroom to CSA B651 standards. It wouldn't say put an angled bar 36 inches from the wall, or sorry, from the floor, and within 18 inches of the toilet. It doesn't get into this prescriptive stuff. It just identifies the issues. The next step for the operator would be to bring in a professional and look at the issues in detail and create a design criteria manual, or at least a long-term plan for the facility to move forward. In February of 2017, we received funding from the BC provincial government to officially roll out the RHFAC program as a pilot in British Columbia. The grant was for $9 million, and of that grant, what we're trying to do here is first roll out the rating system itself. And in this next 18 months, we are going to do a rating of 1,800 sites, facilities, and buildings, and parks and trails, as part of our commitment to the provincial government for this funding. It does a couple of things. Number one, it takes our training and it tests how well people have got it, how well they operate with it. Does the rating system work? If 5 people rate a building, are the ratings all the same? Now they're going to vary a little bit within the various parameters of the rating system, but at the end of the day, a gold building needs to be a gold building. Accessible park needs to be an accessible park. So there's 1,100 ratings being done, and because of this generous grant, we are able to provide those for free and provide the CSA registry for free for anybody who wants their site rated. As a second bonus, anybody who has their site rated and has issues identified by the assessor that they want to address, we have $4 million of that grant to apply to, to offer as grants to operators to fix various issues that may be on site. Our parameters are for nonprofit societies or municipal operators, we can provide up to $20,000 grant, provided you've been rated first and the problems that you want to fix are part of the rating system. If you're a private business or an operator, a commercial operator, it's a matching funds offer. We'll offer $20,000 if you'll put up $20,000. So for us, this is the perfect scenario. This is not only identifying issues and problems and providing roadmaps for operators and providing a national pool of people, industry professionals who can identify access reliably, but we also now have funding to actually do some work and actually make the changes and actually make things better. So that in a nutshell is the program overall. Admittedly, it's not designed directly for parks operators. It was initially conceived of as a program for commercial buildings, retail buildings, industrial sites, and large multifamily residential units. But we see the lack of, not the lack of, but the focus coming off parks and recreation as being wrong, and we'd like to correct that. We'd like to work with more parks and make sure our rating system does work well in that same environment. It should, but parks are a unique challenge. And so what we'd like to do is have the opportunity to rate some parks, to be part of this BC grant and get into the program and find out what we can do to help you at a real grassroots level and move things forward. But we don't profess to know how exactly that can best help you as operators. Our goal is to remove barriers. Our goal is to remove barriers on a national scale. And that includes parks and trails and playgrounds. Just as my parting note, I just want to say one of the things that when it comes to accessibility, we really want you to challenge your assumptions. I want you to challenge your assumptions about who you think your customers really are. Most products, most facilities, most planning is based on 18 to 55-year-old males, and the rest of the community has to adapt around that. And that makes no sense at all. The participant in your facility now is typically over the age of 55 and refusing steadfastly to recognize that there are people with disabilities. Your facilities need to accommodate all users and at the same time minimize the labeling, minimize the segregation that labeling creates. If you've got a separate ramp that goes up to a building that's off to the side, and instead of walking in the front door, I've got to leave my whoever I was walking with and go round to a ramp and up to the side, you're labeling me disabled. You're segregating me from the actual population. So that labeled disabled thing is a very difficult problem when you're working with older adults and seniors. we're looking for partners as well. One of the things we recognized very early in the game is we can't do this alone. This is something that the Rick Hansen Foundation does well, is partner and get people excited and get people moving toward the solution. And we would welcome any of this kind of activity with any partnerships or any opportunities to create more accessible park and trail experiences for people with disabilities, all of them. That's all I have to say about this. I'm open to questions on the whole entire program, or maybe you've got a specific access issue in your park or recreational facility you'd like to talk about. But that is the RHFAC in a nutshell. And we launched officially last Tuesday, and we are now in an 18-month process to do 1,100 ratings. And that is a very, very big task that we're very much looking forward to. Questions?
Oh, yeah, thanks so much, Brad. It's Vishna back on the line. That was a terrific presentation. There's so much great information. I'm so excited that the program...
Maybe too much.
No, I thought it was terrific. And really, I didn't personally realize that it had just launched. So I think that this is phenomenal timing, and CPRA is very pleased to be able to share the information with everyone. So we do have a few questions coming in. Sure. We have a question from Karen. What about opportunities for other provinces for these types of services, and are there plans to expand?
Oh yes, we see this as a national program. We're rolling it out right away. The focus on BC, of course, is partly because we're in BC, but because of the grant we have here, it's kind of an easier sell, as you can well imagine, when there's no costs involved. When we move outside of BC, we work on a cost recovery basis, so we have to find a way to pay for the CSA registry, which our hard cost is about $1,000, and then there's the rating itself and what goes with it. So our problem in other provinces is only that there's a cost, and those numbers, those actual details are coming out probably by the end of this week. We'll have hard numbers for provinces other than BC. But the rating system will be available, and we have raters now. As I say, the training program started. We have raters right across the country. We're looking at the government of Nova Scotia is looking at putting up a similar grant to what BC did, albeit on a smaller scale. And so we are obviously encouraging that. And we're looking at the same idea in Alberta and Manitoba, but it's pretty preliminary discussions for that. We do see it as a national scale. We have a project in Ontario going right now with the Science and Technology Museum in Ottawa, and Ontario rating services will be available. Well, actually, they're available as of now.
Okay, that's great. And I see TD was asking about Ontario, so whether the ratings do apply in Ontario or are tied to the building codes, and if they wanted to get certified as an assessor, there's a course, I guess, in April in Vancouver. Is there certification in Ontario as well? Yes,
in fact, what we are now working with the Community College Association, and we're operating the course right in Vancouver for the Vancouver Community College. Our goal is to roll it out to community colleges right across the country. We've been in discussions with all manner of them, including Ryerson and Dalhousie and well, virtually the whole system. So our goal is to have the training available in each province, and in fact in each region within the province, on a regular basis. So it would occur quarterly as part of continuing education programs that occur through the community college system. So it will be available in a classroom near you.
Well, I think that's great news, and certainly I'm sure that information, you'll post that accordingly and share it with your networks, and we'd be pleased to share that information as well. Jennifer, perhaps I can just ask you while we're having our Q&A session, we've got a few evaluation questions that we'd like to ask our participants from who participated in the webinar, and just take a minute to fill some of that out. And again, we'll go back to our questions here. So, all right, so applying for the trainer program, that will be posted. And then is there a timeline, I guess, available for the Ontario course? Do you have a sense of when that might be taking place?
if I say soon, will I be forgiven? We have a number of things going on in Ontario. One of the things, because Ontario has its the AODA, can't even say it, the AODA, we want to ensure that the program aligns correctly with that. So I'm literally in the process of ensuring that right now. It's not that difficult, to be honest, because we're not really measuring from a code perspective. We're measuring real access. So at the same time, as being kind of above the code discussions, we obviously got to make sure we align with the AODA approach, which we're doing right now. But I anticipate by the spring we'll be actively rating in Ontario, and I'm hoping that the course will be available. And I should mention, the other thing that's happening with the course, right now it's a 60-hour course designed to bring someone from ground zero up to speed. We are developing a pro version of the course aimed at architects, planners, people already working in the industry that have the basic knowledge. So people I don't have to teach how to read a code to, or I don't have to teach how to read drawings, those kinds of things. So we think we can cut the course in half, and that the pro course will be available. About half of it will be online, half the 30 hours, and the other half will be rather in a community college or something of that ilk in the site. But the pro course should be available as of spring next year as well. So that's another thing that this group in particular might be interested in looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so Colin was just asking about whether the training could be done online. So you're saying that perhaps partially online and partially kind of in person. Do you feel that training really kind of does need to be done in person?
Yeah, there's a couple of elements that really, really need to be done in person. One of the most important in my mind is disability awareness training. So the very first day of both courses is people have the wheelchair experience. So we put you in wheelchairs and we send you out into the facilities, and we take you in a group of 5 with someone who's an experienced wheelchair user, and just to try to help you put a face to disability. We also do simulate 5 levels of blindness using goggles, so that people can understand what an older adult or senior is actually seeing with macular degeneration or retinopathy or whatever it might be. And so that experience, I feel, is absolutely critical to understanding and grasping the concept of the need for universal design and how it applies. So we need an in-person version. Now we are setting up to deliver that course in each province, so that you wouldn't have to fly to Vancouver or anything, but it would be a matter of, as part of the training course, there will be about 2 or maybe 3, but probably only 2 days where they'd have to be on site in person.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's great, and I think as you continue to develop that that time frame and those schedules, more information is pending. I just wanted to ask you, Brad, you had mentioned that, obviously given parks and the outdoor spaces is a little bit more challenging for the current courses or the ability, the ratings that you have. Do you feel like the recreation facility and the recreation complex is that more suitable for not the courses, but the program as it stands now? You were mentioning other types of buildings, residences and office buildings and such, but do you think that the facilities can fall into that category right now?
Oh yeah, I definitely do. I readily admit our focus has been elsewhere, but in fact, my next call right after this is with Craig Paulson at BC Parks to talk about how to apply it in conjunction with their new standards that they just evolved. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to us that the parks and recreation and that whole recreational component be a part of the rating system, and because it's such a critical part of the community. So our rating system right now, we have a specific module designed for trails and parks and recreational use. It, though, has not been tested to the same extent that others have. So that's my only hesitation on that whole subject. We'd love to have an opportunity to not only just rate your facilities and be able to judge the system there, but to get your direct input on whether it's effective or not, or whether it's useful or not.
Okay, that's great. And we'll just take one last question here. It was TD again asking, if someone is an assessor, can they rate their own business, or would this be considered a conflict of interest?
If you become an RHFAC Access professional, you can submit any rating you want. And so there's another little catch here which I didn't outline earlier. So when the assessor makes, an RHFAC accredited assessor makes a rating and posts it on the CSA website, after the owner has looked at it and made a decision on whether they're going forward or not, the next thing that happens is it goes to an adjudicator. In this case, it's me. So it comes to my desk, so we have a second set of eyes on it, so that if an assessor is wrong, or maybe judging a little high, or just have a second set of eyes on it, adjudicator has to approve the rating and the submission. So that as an RHFAC professional, if you took the course and you became CSA certified as an access professional for the Rick Hansen program, then you are free to file any rating you want on the registry. It will then come through me to make sure to keep you honest, and we go back again. So that's a long answer to saying, yeah, you can do that. Okay, well, that's perfect. Well, I think our time has come to an end, and I think what we'll do is encourage everyone to check out the rickhansen.com website for further information on the program, and for a timetable and schedules for classes taking place near you. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Brad, and the Rick Hansen Foundation for taking the time to share this important information with everyone. It's certainly a very valuable program, and we look forward to seeing it succeed in the sector. I also want to thank Jennifer Pelche and Parks and Recreation Ontario for hosting the session for CPRA today, and thank you to the participants for taking the time out of their day to join us. The webinar will be recorded, as we mentioned, and we will also be sharing that link once it's posted to the CPRA website. So with that, everyone, thank you very much, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Happy Halloween. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, thank you. Take care now. All righty. Bye now. Thanks, guys. Guys and girls.
The host has left the meeting, so at this time, the meeting will come to an end. Thank you.